All right, we are back. We're going to do another live Q&A. Today, we're going to focus on what soft skills are needed to get into development and be a successful developer. So I have a pretty big outline as I was thinking through some of this stuff. It's not going to be in order. I didn't prioritize this based on like what soft skills you should know more, but a lot of it is just like thinking back to different experiences I've had interacting with other engineers and stories that I've heard, some horror stories. So I think I have a pretty good list to share with you. And I think this is going to be helpful for a lot of people. But like usual, I am running behind a little bit. So let's go ahead and start our playlist. Where are we? I think I'm feeling synthwave for today. I really think I'm feeling synthwave. And I forgot to toss it in Discord. But as we go through these, if you have any questions of your own, if you have any questions about any of the content, or you come up with something of your own that you want to talk about, we could definitely dive into it. Hey, Code Thing. Hello, everyone. Exciting topic for me since I tend to be more introvert and I'm currently trying to work on improving my near non-existent soft skills. You are in good company. A lot of developers are trying to do that, but hope this is helpful. Hey, Jeremy. Hey, Curiosity. How you guys doing? All right. Hold on. Give me a few minutes. Give me a few minutes to shout this out on Discord and... Okay, so the playlist is playing. So yeah, I guess all I need to do is shout it out on Discord and we are good to go. I have been rushed. I've been rushed a lot. I've been trying to schedule tons of content for the future. And I'm trying to get ahead of the game because honestly, next week, there were a couple scheduled podcast episodes that essentially aren't happening anymore. So I'm going to have a gap. So what I want to do is, just in case things come up, I want to make sure that I have content in place and scheduled where I can just fill that slot. That's what I'm trying to do. So right now, every day I'm just like scheduling tons of content for the future. I'm going to start posting videos on LinkedIn as well. How's it going? It's going well, Lewis. How you doing? All right, toss it in Discord. All right, perfect. I think we're ready to go. Are we? We are. Okay. Pretty well done. Thanks for asking. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. It's the middle of the week. It's almost Friday. We should be excited about that. All right. So, where do we start? A lot of aspiring developers, a lot of people focused on tech are antisocial. You are not the only one. I promise you, you are not the only one. You are not the only one that feels introverted. You are not the only one feels like you don't understand people. You are not the only one that feels like you don't even get along with people. I promise you, you are not the only one. This is a pretty common thing among software engineers. And I think it's an important topic. And that's why I want to talk about it. And even when I did that poll, this is like the second one that you guys wanted me to talk about. The first one was mentorship. I think a lot of people are trying to get better with this. I think a lot of people want to get better with this. They want to contribute to the team. They want to be successful. They want to get promoted. They just, they want to go to their job, do a good job at it, get along with people, get promoted, given those opportunities, and live a good life. I think most people want that. And very often, their actions in life and the way they try to build up habits and the way they even self-analyze their previous actions or previous interactions, it doesn't really map to a successful trajectory. And I guess we'll get into self-awareness. So I'm going to go through, kind of wrote some things down. I'm going to go through some of this stuff. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Happy to dive further into it. But, so going back, and this is, you hear me over and over and over and over, don't just get into software engineering for the money. Don't do it. It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. You're always going to hear these outliers, these exceptions of people. Yeah, I just learned what I need to learn, and then I got hired, and I'm just making tons of money. Those are extreme outliers if that is their main motivation. Most people get software engineering jobs because they learn to enjoy it. They're also curious people. And so I want to dive into that. I want to dive into curiosity. When you learn to enjoy coding, you'll like different parts of being a software engineer. There are different aspects to it. But one thing I think is really important that'll help with no matter what you enjoy is curiosity. Curiosity in how things work, curiosity in what's out there, new solutions, new technologies. I think software engineers sometimes get trapped. I guess we'll start with aspiring developers. Aspiring developers usually don't. I understand that it's a little bit hard to decide on your stack what technologies you should learn. So I think looking at other software engineers, curriculums, courses can very much help you solidify that structure and what you should learn in your trajectory. So your long-term learning. But also, I think some software engineers will shy away, aspiring developers will shy away from building that quirky little mobile app that they wanted to try because they truly think learning web development, that's the key into the industry, right? Got to learn web development, got to learn all these languages, just one step at a time and go through it. And that, but when you have those things that kind of sound intriguing, that sound interesting, I wonder if I could build that. I wonder how you could build something like that. And you just toss that aside because I just got to learn what I got to learn. That is one of the most boring journeys as a software engineer. I couldn't keep up with that journey. There is no way in hell that I could become a software engineer without that curiosity and going off tangent a little bit and building something quirky, or I don't know, building a script for Xbox, or building just kind of a random mobile app. I feel fortunate because I love web development. I like building things that I can create a community out of. And the web is a really good place to invite tons of people to that community app that I built. That's why I really, I guess I just followed suit with the web development. I love it, right? What's up, Hologram? So it's okay to go off tangent. And I think a lot of aspiring developers focus too much on what they need to learn rather than just taking a day out to kind of dive into a new technology to see, oh, this kind of makes me curious. I wonder if I'm going to be interested in. I think taking a day out to do that as an aspiring developer is really, really healthy. Or trying to build something, even if it's something stupid no one is going to use, just building that to, feel like, or show yourself that you can build something like that. Take advantage of those opportunities. Don't shy away from them. But that kind of mentality, that kind of mindset will carry over into being a software engineer. That curiosity will carry over into being, what's up, Intel? It'll carry over into being a software engineer that's curious and that's going to stay up to date with their skills, up to date with their up to date with relevant technologies. And maybe you find a new testing framework and you're like, this is really interesting. Our tests suck. Like, we're just at this point writing tons of unit tests just to say we have 100% test coverage. Like, we're not even testing the right things. And maybe it's because of the dynamics, the conventions of the testing framework, what it's meant to be used for. There's, and even like React testing, I think it's called React testing library or testing. Yeah, React testing library kind of brought a little bit of a new dynamic of how to test React applications. But someone on our team decided to explore that and figure that out. They were curious, right? That curiosity is important. And that comes from enjoyment in coding. If you feel like you're not enjoying coding anymore, you need to figure out why that is. Sometimes it's just life circumstances. And you have to deal with that. And you have to recognize that. And that takes self-awareness. which is another skill you got to build up. But curiosity will keep you from becoming stagnant in your position as a software engineer. And usually like 2-3 years into the position, usually you're kind of starting to do a lot of similar things that you've already done. You're getting more comfortable with the position. Sometimes you don't feel challenged. And so I highly recommend software engineers to build personal projects on the side. Get excited about coding. Just imagine, like for me, and I've talked about this before, sometimes I get tired of building up other people's dreams. I get tired of building up other people's code bases. You know, that's one negative thing of software engineering that I just don't like about the industry. I would love to, like, you know, companies will say, oh yeah, you have ownership of that code base, but no, it's still your code base. You just want me to wake up in the middle of the night to fix a bug if it, you know, if it breaks late at night, and that's your version of ownership. And I mean, there's more to it. I'm kind of just being facetious about that, but I think building your personal projects can also, there's also that opportunity. Like, you don't have to necessarily have curiosity and keep up with technologies just to do well in your job. A lot of people want to end up building like their own application. They want to build their own application, potentially put a pricing model behind it. I think a lot of people's dreams are to work for themselves, right? And when you kind of explore new technologies, or even if you just take what you've learned at work and tackle a different problem with that stack, with those technologies, and build your own application, trying to like get some sort of traction with that application, that can give you kind of that just excitement and challenge that'll spark that energy, and you could bring that energy into work as well. So there are a lot of different aspects of this, but you know, staying up to date, but also staying energized for coding is really, really important, that a lot of software engineers neglect. And I still have memories of software engineers that I worked with that just kind of head down, come in, go to their desk, code, go home. No excitement in their position whatsoever. It's like all the life has been sucked out of them. And it's depressing. It's depressing to meet software engineers that let themselves get into that situation. Don't be that software engineer. You don't have to be that software engineer. So stay curious. All right, critical thinking. I got to remember to drink water while I'm doing this. I think I'm going to have a lot of fun doing this live stream. I have a lot to say about this. All right. So, critical thinking. You're a problem solver. You are 100% a problem solver, and coding is a tool that you specialize in. And it might take a while to like really let that resonate with you and to realize that. It might take a while in the industry to realize that. But you have to understand, a lot of these problems that you're solving, a lot of these features that you're building out have a root problem. Most likely, like if you're working on a product, you've gotten feedback, right? You've gotten feedback from your clients or your users. You've gotten that feedback, you've taken that feedback, you've identified patterns, consistent patterns across a lot of that feedback, and you implement a solution through code to solve that problem, right? Make your application just a little bit better. But a lot of that, you have to realize, like, software engineers are going to get pulled into different conversations that are not just coding related. And a lot of it's just working out that solution. And I would say more often than not, a lot of developers are pulled in, to provide some perspective to that. But usually it's to show like, okay, we already have this pattern in our code base. We could implement it pretty easily, or like the scope of this is actually much larger than you think it is. And just talking through the technical restrictions of that feature, of that solution. But very often, like, good software engineers, and I see this with a lot of senior software engineers, they're pulled into conversations that are really focused on talking through a business problem and talking through a business solution that's the best solution to that problem. And a lot of the solution, usually once you get to the code portion, that problem has pretty much, for the most part, already been solved. And so if you can be that software engineer that does listen to the business's concerns, the needs, and you start seeing yourself as someone who identifies real world problems, real business problems, first and foremost, if you can do that, that is going to really help the company notice you for promotions. That companies care, frankly, about making more money, right? And the more you can dive into the business needs outside of the code, that's going to get noticed. That's a software engineer that companies want to keep. And so I think a lot of people kind of just want to dive into these technical solutions, but if you don't expand that and realize the problem and solution exists outside of the code as well, and the code is frankly just a small portion of that, I mean, frankly, that's just something you want to avoid. It's something that's not going to, it's not going to get you noticed. It's not going to get you promotions. And so taking some interest in why, like even just thinking, okay, why was like Facebook built? Why was Twitter built? What was the problem, that Mark Zuckerberg was trying to solve? How did he solve it with that initial application? You can go back and see that initial implementation and realize, oh, it's nothing like, what it is today. But why did he build that? What was the need in that community, in that, in the online community that made that application just excel and views and uses and users? I think thinking about websites that you even just navigate to, interact with daily, understanding even just like a specific feature within that application, what problem does that solve? It'll start training your mind to start kind of identifying problems that can be solved through technology, through code. You have to train your mind to do that. A lot of this stuff that I'm saying, it's not necessarily natural. So I have people that come into my community, brand new. They come into my community and they'll just ask some very, very generic question. Doesn't give any context of, did they look anything up? What did they find when they did that Google search? Where are they getting stuck based on that little research that they have done so far? No one wants to answer those questions. And I think people that do are just very generous people. Questions that get answered in my community are usually, hey, I have a very specific problem. Here's what I've looked up. Here's my research. Showing that you've put some initial investment into trying to figure out the problem on your own is huge. And some software engineers, maybe sometimes it's a lack of confidence. Sometimes it's laziness. Sometimes it's just bad habits over and over and over. Just, going into random communities, just asking tons of questions, floating by as you're trying to grow as a software engineer because everyone else is finding the solution for you. Chances are you're probably not going to get hired if that's what you're doing. But if you do end up getting hired and you take that habit into work and you're just constantly bugging senior engineers or just other engineers in general, like, hey, can you help me solve this? Or I can't really figure this out. You've spent like 5 minutes on it, 10 minutes on it. You haven't even attempted it. Software engineering requires critical thinking. It requires effort. Laziness is a horrible trait to bring into software engineering. And you would be surprised at the number of people that aren't willing to do the research, to do the legwork, to try to figure that out on their own. A lot of people do that. A lot of aspiring developers do that. And usually that habit is eventually broken. A good team will break that habit and they'll send them right back to their desk, maybe with an article, maybe with something else, but they'll send them right back to the desk to start putting in the work to try to figure that solution out. And as a junior developer, there's also, you have to realize, don't get intimidated by that. As a junior developer, you're going to have more questions than like 2 years into being a software engineer. And that's expected. That's normal. But I think what a lot of software engineers want you to do is think critically, try to attempt a problem on your own. Don't become super dependent on every other engineer to solve your problem. Try it on your own. And a lot of frustration from software engineers is because it's pretty obvious that you didn't do any research. You're just being lazy. That's where software engineers usually get frustrated at junior developers. Yeah, we'll pause there. Any questions so far? I might actually turn the temperature down in my home. It is pretty hot in here. Actually, give me 1 second. It is hot in here. Then we'll continue forward. Oh, wait, I set this up. All right. Be right back. All right, I am back. It's like 70 degrees. It's like 70 degrees in here. It's not normal. I don't know or understand why people feel like 70 degrees is a normal temperature to have. Like 69 is still even a little bit too hot. Like I like keeping my temperature at about 67. It's nice and cool, feels good, keeps me awake, especially if I'm working. Can't do 70. It's way too hot. All right, so accountability. This is a really tough one. Getting feedback on your code. Just absorbing the material. You're good. You're good. I know a lot of people do that. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in chat. Usually I'll take brief pauses to answer questions. Being able to think on your own is so important with a lot of jobs. Definitely something I'm continuing to work on. Yeah, and sometimes it's just confidence. It's doing it over and over, building personal projects, getting more confident in what you can create. And sometimes that does take time. All right, so accountability. There are definitely some junior developers, entry-level developer. There are some senior developers that struggle with receiving feedback, especially with code reviews and taking code reviews personally. Some companies don't even have a formal code review process. You have no idea how valuable that is to a newer developer. It's valuable to every developer, but especially when you're starting out. But there are some people that kind of just want to write code and they have an ego behind it, right? They really latch onto a convention. They're unwilling to adapt to the company's conventions. Or even just interactions. Let me give an example. Sometimes in design meetings, I would see front-end developers that are trying to enforce consistent patterns, and they don't, and sometimes designers will always, like, designers create really cool looking things, right? But sometimes it isn't always feasible. A lot of, like, when your code base grows and grows and grows, those conventions, that consistency is important, and going out of bounds of that and creating some off module to be implemented into this feature usually is not what front-end engineers want to do or want to implement, and they need to push back with that. But some front engineers will push back so much where they'll just completely shut down. They'll shut down anyone that challenges those conventions. Like, and this is where the ego comes in, like design or product possibly saying, hey, we might be implementing this feature a few times. Maybe we could create a pattern about it. And if you're just a front-end engineer that has no flexibility whatsoever, or you're not able to clearly explain why that is a bad idea with the front end implementation, it can come off as like very abrasive and unflexible. And a lot of these conversations that you have across the team, they need to be empathetic. They need to, like, a lot of engineers kind of just I don't know, they're just response bots. They're just shutting everything down and saying, no, we can't do this, or that's a bad idea. And sometimes you get like a lot of ego and arrogance from software engineers that kind of just even look down on other people trying to even challenge their perspective. And it's like, yo, like, and there's a lot of arrogance with software engineers. Like, it's a very hard skill to pick up, but I'm telling you, could spot these people from a mile away. There's a lot of arrogance with some software engineers that just think they hold a better position than the other team. They are more valuable in the company just because they get paid more. Like that kind of arrogance is going to really, really hurt you in the long run. Usually companies are going to fire that person very quickly, and they're pretty surprised that got through their interview process. But a lot of software engineers struggle with that accountability, that self-accountability, owning their mistakes as well, and even just like apologizing. But let's even talk about like from a technical implementation. It's like sometimes bugs happen, or sometimes a feature gets implemented where, you know, designer products like I don't think that's what we talked about. I don't think, you know, those were the requirements. How did this get pushed up into the code base? And one of the worst things that you can do is immediately, I hear this all the time. It's like, this is what you told me to do. This is the requirements you gave me, right? And it's like, and then that sentence just stops. I've heard that from even several software engineers where they don't even try to analyze the conversation that even happened, that maybe they might have misunderstood the requirements. Like, and they just give that blunt response. And it's such an abrasive way to handle that situation and interact with the product manager or designer, whoever is concerned about that feature that's being implemented. And I think a lot of software engineers struggle with owning up that they might have made a mistake. And that comes from a lot of arrogance in even just maybe pride with the position. I think there's a huge toxic, I think it's getting way better in the tech industry, but sometimes, especially with a lot of old school developers, you might get that toxic arrogance that's constantly abrasive and pushing back without even taking a moment to think back. Okay, well, where did this misunderstanding of the product requirements happen? Right? I'm giving it a specific example, and I'm just using product requirements specifically, but this can happen in a lot of different situations and interactions. And so I've also noticed this with some software engineers. It's like they take feedback personally with the code, and there's just an ego that I think a lot of software engineers need to really, really work on, and being open to that feedback. That's huge. If you can become more open to the feedback and not immediately being emotional, reactionary to a lot of the feedback that you're getting, very often you can in a way, like when you walk through that situation with someone and you come from a place of empathy and you have that full conversation. I've had that. And then at the end of the day, they're like, oh, you know what? I'm glad we talked through this. You're right. I actually did give you the wrong requirement. But I've also, when I started, I was also on the other end, just being like completely disagreeing, right? When I started as a software engineer and I had to learn this, I was that abrasive person. You know, I wasn't that bad, but I know I've had a couple situations at my first position where like I could have talked through that a little bit more, right? And I did take feedback personally. And that's something like most people in general. And when I was a hiring manager at the aquatics department, I realized like most people in general just don't handle feedback really well. They just don't. A lot of people are going through different things. They have anxiety. They have their own family situations, their own life situations. And sometimes they let that overwhelm them, and they're not grounded anymore. And I think this comes from a place of arrogance, but I also think it comes from a place of not grounding yourself, right? For me to ground myself so things don't affect me as much, I can take in that feedback. I don't take it personally. I don't let my ego get in the way. I got to run. I got to do high intensity cardio. That's like the number one thing I use to ground myself. Then it's also like diet, good sleep patterns, etc., which I screw up several times throughout the year, and I'm constantly working on that. But I also think like if software engineers can, so I think some people when they hear this, they're like, you know, I've been accused of being abrasive before. I don't even know if I could work on it. You would be surprised at the progress that you can make with your interactions just by grounding yourself, finding that thing in life that de-stresses you, that allows you to go into the next situation without all this anxiety, all this stress. And you have to find that. Some people don't even know what that is. They just live life through being anxious and being stressful, and that takes time. But for me, it's high intensity cardio. That's always done it for me. And if I don't keep up with that, which I didn't during the pandemic, like my I don't know if you'd call it anxiety. Like I just wasn't grounded. My head was flighty. I was all over the place. I couldn't focus. So find that grounding. You would be surprised at how helpful that is with all of your interactions. Even when we go through the rest of this stuff, it's incredibly powerful. But yeah, a lot of people have trouble taking feedback, and you probably are safe to assume that you are one of those people, and just try to be self-aware. Think about the previous interaction. Think about how it went. Look at, like, when you are interacting with someone, try to pay attention to their posture. Are they kind of closed off? Do they start, clenching up a little bit and becoming a little bit more defensive, even just in their responses? Or are they, hands down, a little bit more open, facing you? They're not turning away. Like, you can look for little things like that to indicate that they're open to what you're saying. And that usually shows that you're creating rapport and you're through a place of empathy with them. That often is a really good indicator of that. And then even like when they leave and then they interact with you that the next day, do they seem like they want to interact with you? Were they kind of avoiding it, right? You have to start trying to read the room, read people like that. If you can start doing that, a lot of this self-awareness that a lot of software engineers lack and have trouble with, it gets easier. The interactions get easier. You want to start talking with people because they start that conversation and they want to engage with you, and they do it in a very friendly manner rather than like just quick, to the point, closed up, reserved, right? So you have to start paying attention to those little mannerisms. And it's not always easy. Like even just what I'm saying, to be able to try to pay attention to all these things. I know some people might think, man, that's a lot of work to be able to just be able to interact with people and like make friends and connections within the company. And you have to realize, like, what I'm saying comes with many years. You're not going to just like get hired, and especially if this is your first office job, you're not going to just get hired and just become this perfect person that everyone wants to talk to. And you lay out all your ideas very clearly and through empathy, and you listen to people, you do a lot of active listening, like that kind of stuff. It takes time. Give yourself time and patience to work on that. But the only way to do it is interacting with people and paying attention to that stuff. We'll pause there. And again, if you have any questions about what I'm saying, let me know. We're going to keep diving into soft skills that I think make software engineers effective, get promotions, become hirable. I've noticed the arrogance, especially on Stack Overflow. Yeah, Stack Overflow is a really good example of that. There's a lot of arrogance on that platform. For me, it's jujitsu. Training changed my life. That's awesome, V-Slice. I hear that with a lot of people that dive deep into jujitsu. Are designers usually open to what devs have to say about a particular design and how it might not work? And do they usually respond with figure it out? So no, generally the designers that I worked with were very much more open than engineers that I worked with. I think designers in general have shown a lot more empathy and have a lot better people skills than the average developer. And I think I can imagine companies really value that, because designers are really, UX and designers specifically in product, are interacting with multiple departments. They have to interact with a lot of people. So I think that's usually looked for in the hiring process more so than a developer. So no, I haven't had any bad interactions. I've had a designer get frustrated at me because I had to tell her, like, no, we're going to use this pattern. We already have a pattern. You're kind of going out of bounds. And this is the beauty. Like, if a company can bring in the designer to create a pattern across the entire code base and break it up into different pieces and components and mention what's going to be reusable, and they create their own like branding pattern, and you bring the designer into that process to own that. And then when they go out of bounds, you're like, hey, you came up with this, right? And that's why I think every company should really consider giving the designer that initial buy-in to like really create this and that ownership, because then you have something very tangible that you can point to. It's like, you're not just being a difficult front-end developer, you're pointing out, like, even with their brand consistency, it's inconsistent. They're trying to do something out of bounds. Do we really need to do that? Probably not, right? And so having something tangible like that, and then giving an example of, well, like, if you can, like, I'm not saying like meet halfway. You don't necessarily have to do that. But if you can provide another solution that does solve their problem too, that's a really valuable trait to have as a developer. And that's really going to open up design and UX to hearing your pushback, to be just being more open to that pushback. Like if you're constantly abrasive, that's when you start shutting that designer out. But usually designers are pretty open from the beginning. And then if a designer, in my opinion, if a designer things are going well with the designer or the developer, more often than not, it's probably the developer. That's not always true. I'm not saying all designers are perfect. That's just my experience and just stories and just like interacting with tons of UX and design, even outside of my current positions. That's the feeling I get. But yeah, they're pretty open for the most part. I'm working as a teacher part-timer. I have a dream of being a web developer. I always push myself to learn, but I always don't stick on my learning path. How can I stick on learning? Well, what's preventing you from sticking on the learning? You already know the answer. A lot of these questions, you guys know the answers already. You got to share that. Can be introverted person become a software engineer? Yes, you can. It's about the interactions. Introverted people can develop effective communication, but you're going to probably have to go out of your comfort zone to interact with people, to practice your people skills. That's what you're probably going to have to push yourself with. Just figured it out, bro. Just Josh. I don't even know. You didn't even say anything before. What? All right. Cool. Oh, I touched on a lot of the topics. No, just the next section. Another thing in meetings, right? I see this more often than not with software engineers. Usually junior developers are a little bit more quiet in meetings, but sometimes you can get a developer that really is constantly giving a quick response, not letting other people talk in the meeting. It's like sometimes you have to read the room, right? And you can kind of be oppressive in the conversation in the sense that you know, when you're talking and constantly just like disagreeing without even phrasing it in a way that you fully understand what they're trying to say. And you're that person that honestly probably talks too much, might even talk over people in the meeting. Like this happens. And some people are actually unaware that they're doing this. And I think reading the room and how people are responding to what you're saying is really important. Again, you know, I talked about those individual interactions, but you know, you can also read the room. You can also read body postures in an entire room of people. It obviously becomes harder when you have a larger set of people that you're meeting with, right? But this skill, when you practice even just at an individual level and you get better at reading people, it gets easier. And it like you can almost, I feel like I'm at a point where I can go into a meeting, I can say something, and within like 5 seconds, I can see just like who's interested, who's not interested, who has doubts. And I almost challenge myself to try to guess that. And I'm not always right. There's no way I'm always right. And I don't ask them if this is what they thought, but I can usually validate that by talking to them. If someone felt, I don't know, a little uncomfortable or a little like, I don't know, they didn't get their word in, or they didn't, they still have concerns. Yeah, it's usually like people that didn't express their concerns, maybe because you were talking too much. But usually having an individual conversation with that person just to make sure that like they're on board, or I want to hear out their concerns because maybe I didn't consider them and I want to hear them, right? And that's usually how I'll approach that situation. And very often when I can detect that in someone, it's usually I just usually get more support, a better connection, a better relationship with that person over time. And I'm telling you that the better job that you can do at building all of those relationships up and work, the easier your job is going to be. Your job is going to be way easier, and making people feel comfortable speaking up it'll really help the entire team kind of lay down at a well understood foundation, requirements, everything that actually needs to happen. because it's usually misunderstandings and people not speaking up, expressing their concerns that later down the road, now all of a sudden they bring up the concerns like, why didn't you mention that in the meeting? You know, so a lot of times people need to work on speaking up, and that maybe that's you as well. It's like you need to learn you need to learn how to and be comfortable speaking up in that meeting and expressing that concern, because it could save the company money, tons of money down the road. You bringing it up like after the feature's already been implemented, it's like, yeah, I had my doubts. Like, why the fuck didn't you speak up, right? But a lot of times, like, I think more developers need to be self-aware of like how they come across in those meetings and try to read the room. Again, that's going to come with experience and time. But you can do this. Like, it probably sounds silly, but I don't know if you've ever people watched and kind of just like watching different people interact and guessing, like you're just having a coffee sitting on a bench and you see two people arguing, and then you see like the conversation kind of calm down a bit and you can't even hear what they're saying. It's like far away, and you could just see the body posture and the mannerisms, and you can kind of tell like which part of the conversation they're in. I don't know. People watching is kind of creepy. I don't really do it that often, but I did it in Chicago and I thought it was kind of interesting. And like doing certain things like that, even outside of the workplace, outside of the meeting, if you're too shy to initiate a lot of those conversations to practice this, it trains your mind to observe. And more often than not, I think more people probably need to start with observation versus trying to, force the conversation in the way that they're trying to get it to go. Right? Just pay attention to how other people interact. Did that work out for this person? Is this person now angry at them? Right? And so even just starting out with observation, if you're an introvert, can be very helpful and just help you come from a little bit more of, educated, grounded space before you do start with these interactions. But eventually you got to talk to people. That's how you practice and pick a lot of this stuff up. Finally found off time to watch your love streams at work. That's awesome, Cody. That's awesome. Welcome. I'm glad you can make it. I'm in a coding boot camp that is going too far with soft skills. What do you mean by that? Speaking up is definitely something I need to work on. And let's see if I even... We'll touch on that. A lot of people are afraid to speak up. And usually that comes from a place of how, so for example, like when I was in a coding boot camp at Full Stack Academy, I was afraid to speak up. And if I think back, I was afraid of looking stupid. I was afraid of the teachers thinking that I wasn't paying attention. I should have spoken up more. I should have asked questions. And very often, a really cool thing that I noticed, very often when you have doubts, other people have doubts. And when you are the person to speak up, you become that person that other people that are afraid to speak up look up to. They already agree with you. I'm telling you, if you have doubts about something, most often tons of other people have doubts about it as well. You speaking up gains a lot of respect in the room. You doing it in a respectful way, obviously, not, we talked about like, and we could even dive into a little bit more of like specific interactions, because we're going to dive into communication specifically. But I'm telling you, try it. More often than not, it's going to be a better experience than you think it is. And I think a lot of people are just afraid of what others will think of them when they do speak up. But it's a common problem. Hey, Don, it's who has asked that work as a teacher part-timer and doesn't stick on learning. You have said, I know the answer. I totally don't know the answer. I humbly request your comment on it, sir. So doesn't stick to... So it sounds like you're just not being consistent with your learning. Think about, okay, the previous day I started learning how to code, but this day I didn't. Why is that? That's something like, that's a self-analysis that you actually have to put some time and effort to. Think about it for an hour. Seriously, Kate, I feel like if you just took the time to think about like even just previous day, motivation was there. This day, motivation is not there. What is different about this day than the previous day? I promise you, you know the answer. I think you just need to invest a little bit more time to think about that, because that's a very personal question that no one can answer for you. That it takes self-analysis, right? It takes self-awareness. And like we just talked about self-awareness and building that up, that's something you have to practice. Take an hour, take 2 hours if you need it. Analyze that. All right. Communication. Let's dive into communication. Let me move this. Oh, it's always in the way. There we go. All right. So, as a software engineer, you're going to be talking to people with multiple technical backgrounds, or a variety of technical backgrounds, some of which have none at all, right? I see a lot of software engineers make this mistake. If you can't explain, and coding boot camps, I noticed some coding boot camps practice this, which I think is awesome. You should be able to explain the solution that you're trying to implement in non-technical terms for someone that is non-technical to understand you. If you cannot do that, you don't understand the problem as well as you thought you did. A lot of software engineers struggle with how they phrase things, getting way too technical. You have to realize as a software engineer, you're going to be interacting with several people that are not technical, that also have different personalities, and you're going to constantly change your wording slightly to make sure that they understand what you are saying. Again, if you cannot do that, you don't understand the problem or the solution as well as you thought you did. And you need to go back into that and write it out. Specifically, write it out, and maybe providing that outline in front of you will help you understand a little bit more about it. You're going to be interacting with a lot of non-technical folks, and you need to remember that. That's so important. I cannot emphasize this enough, because a lot of software engineers talk in technical terms. It's like, even think about when you join a company, a lot of companies will have their own internal acronyms that they're referring to, different things within the organization. And I would argue people that do that just say, oh, you'll get to know the acronyms eventually, and that don't take the time to explain them or what they do. It's like, that's the same problem, that they're not really taking it. Sometimes it's just lazy, or I don't know. Sometimes it's just lazy. But I think even explaining company internal tooling and acronyms and what things mean, taking the time out to do that can go a very long way. And you even just coming on as a software engineer. So think about that. You want people to speak clearly in plain English for you, minimize the acronyms, minimize all these terms that you might not know, and explain exactly what's going on, the tools that you have to use, the part of the organization that they're talking about. Same goes when you're a software engineer explaining, this technical implementation to someone that's not technical. It doesn't help them. That's a waste of their time. They don't want to hear you explain some technical jargon they don't understand. That's a waste of both of your times. So try to break that down and explain. You could even practice this in the way that you, even without starting with the technical, I don't know if this is related, but a really cool technique that can help you get better with coding interviews is, before you even start writing code, explaining the solution, explaining the problem and how you see it, how you identify it, and explaining the solution that you're proposing, right? Before even writing a line of code, you're not telling them the code that you're going to write. You're explaining what the solution is in plain terms. That can help you practice explaining some of this technical stuff to people that might not be that technical, right? Maybe it translates over, maybe it isn't. That's more of just an assumption. But a lot of software engineers, you're going to realize this, and thankfully you're going to have teammates. You'll always have that one teammate that's like, I don't know what the hell you just said. You're going to have to simplify it, right? And when you hear that, you probably have a habit of getting way too technical with people that just don't understand what you're talking about. That's something you have to be aware of, and you could practice that. All these things, all these personal skills, well, not all of them. Some of these skills you can practice on a duck. Usually you hear about this rubber duck. If you don't know what it is, a lot of software engineers recommend you put a rubber duck on your desk, and if you are kind of getting stuck, or you want to try to understand something better, try explaining what you believe to be true to that rubber duck, right? Explain it, talk through it. You're not telling them the code that duck the code that you're going to implement. You're talking through that solution in plain English terms, or whatever language you're learning, whatever. So practice that. You can practice that with the rubber duck, but again, eventually you're going to have to interact with people to build some of this stuff. So just be aware of that, and also be patient with people. Sometimes you're going to be interacting with other software engineers that don't know as much as you, or you're just going to be working with, other, people on the team that aren't technical, that it's going to take them a while to really understand what you're talking about. Or they also have their own mannerisms and their own moods that they bring into work. And you have to understand, it's like that one moment. I think some people will get really tripped up in the moment. They have like a really negative moment with someone, they get tripped up, and then like that moment is just like burned into their brain. It doesn't matter, like the previous 10 days, they had really good interactions with this person. But that one moment, and this is just like being a human being. Our minds are just really sadistic sometimes, or masochistic sometimes. Sometimes we just like let that one negative interaction like really embed itself into our experience with the person. You have to be careful with that. You have to be patient with people. You have to understand that they come in with their own baggage sometimes, and they're dealing with crap. And I think being patient is really helpful. And I think in order to be patient, you have to really focus on being empathetic. I think if you can focus on empathizing with someone and trying to understand where they're coming from, that usually can help you be more patient, right? Usually when you can understand someone more, that it's easier to be patient with that person. I'm thinking if I want to dive into this. So I guess I didn't touch on this. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Engineers have their strengths and weaknesses. A good teammate, someone that's really going to be valued in a company, understands that, and they want to build others up around them. Not in a very like pushy, arrogant way, like I know what's best for you, but there are going to be opportunities to help someone grow, especially like if you've been in the industry for a year or two and you have a new entry-level developer, like you can take that initiative to help kind of explain implementation if they're truly stuck, or just trying to recognize, honestly, maybe they don't really look stuff up enough, and maybe that's the advice that you give them. Maybe they're not taking feedback too well, and sometimes you have to be a little bit gentler with the feedback with that person. But I mean, there are so many different examples I can give, but a lot of people are going to have their strengths and weaknesses, and I think sometimes, I guess maybe this was a problem. I'm going to describe a problem I had. I think sometimes I could get frustrated with people because sometimes they would come off as like rude, or they didn't like care to hear what engineers had to say, or they didn't really think through. It almost felt like they were being lazy with like the design was passed off to me, and it's like, we went over this like last week. Obviously, we can't do this. Why are you pushing it again this week? Does this person... This kind of disrespectful. It's like they don't really care or respect what I'm thinking. Like a lot of these thought patterns I've had at some point, right? And I think it's sometimes easy to let those thought patterns be more prevalent in your thinking, and then like it's going to obviously change the way you interact with that person. And I think when you have those, when you immediately jump to this negative assumption, you have to try to recognize that. You have to try to recognize that. And sometimes it means taking 10, 15 seconds to respond. Like I've even said sometimes, it's like, give me a second. I want to think this through. And we'll just sit there for 10 to 15 seconds. And the conversation goes smoothly after that, because I had to think immediately. I wanted to completely disagree. And I'm like, you're kind of like being rude about this, etc. And then when I think through it, sometimes I'm like, okay, yeah, you kind of are being rude. Or I didn't really think about it this way. And I was able to give myself time to empathize with the situation more and understand, like, maybe this person, this designer, because I can even think of like, well, more of a product manager that constantly had bad interactions with the senior engineer at one of my companies I worked with. And it was always like, senior engineer is like, you didn't give me the correct requirements. And like, she did her best to like really solidify these requirements. Like she really put a lot of time into this. And it kind of, I don't know. It at first I thought it was the product manager's fault. And he would even talk to me about it. I remember him talking to me. He's like, yeah, you just got to lay down the line, right? You know, sometimes product managers will push too much. They'll push out a scope. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's looking out for me. So this is a good tip when I go and talk with a product manager. And I'm like, maybe that's kind of a weakness of this product manager. And one thing I realized is the weakness wasn't with her. Like when I listened and I sat through one of her meetings, I'm like, she clearly explains this way better than my product manager. It's like, I want you to give me more features, like switch me out with that engineer. And then I realized it was a weakness of the senior developer to really take in feedback or hold themselves accountable, that like they don't make any mistakes. They had like a really bad ego problem, and that was a weakness. And so even the way I would interact with that senior engineer, it was, I mean, sometimes I don't think you necessarily need to do this, but if you fed his ego just a little bit, like he is completely open. He's very helpful. He'll always look out for you. But then when you challenge him, you have to be careful of challenging him and challenging his thought process, because then he kind of shuts down. He becomes much less helpful. And eventually, like I did get annoyed with that senior engineer, and like we had some pushback with like responsibilities, and he was trying to push his responsibilities on me. I'm like, no, like I this entire workload on my plate. I'm not going to take yours as well. Like you're responsible for the database stuff. It's like, I shouldn't have to do this. That's not how the conversation went, but recognizing like that people that you're interacting with, and they're all going to have their strengths and weaknesses. Don't just assume things based on initial interactions. Like really get to know people on your team, because then you can recognize how to interact with that person. You're not gonna, when you're working at a workplace, and especially in a software engineering team, you're not going to just like, you're going to be yourself, but you also are going to interact with different people in different ways. And it takes sometimes years at a company to kind of figure out how to do that. And that's how companies like really thrive and not step on each other's toes and start yelling at each other. It's like, obviously people get frustrated at each other with a company, but like if you can try to at least understand where they're coming from and engage in that conversation in a different way based on, you know, just a quirk of their personality, it's going to go a long way. Like if you can showcase that, man, like you are going to be very, very hireable, promotable. And that's the kind of, I'm telling you, when you take a little extra effort to do that, that's the kind of attitude and the kind of interpersonal skills that will help you get promoted and become a manager and a director. That's the kind of stuff that you want to focus on long term. And some people just get frustrated. They let their emotions control their actions. And I've done that. I've definitely done that. But it's something like even I have to continue to work on during this day. Today. I want to talk about my interactions on YouTube versus like how I would interact at work. They're very different. All right, let me catch up with chat. I know you guys have been typing. If you guys have any questions about anything we're talking about, you know, feel free to let me know. All right. Have you heard of agile methodology? I have. Don is the best. Appreciate that. All your base are belong to us. Welcome back, Nolan. Have you ever done a video on remote job roadmap? I have not, Collector. Now, any tips on not being overconfident and humbling yourself? Talk with other software engineers, and sometimes it's just looking at larger code bases than yours. Listen to software engineers talk about technical solutions. You listen to senior software engineers talk about technical solutions, you'll realize how little you know very quickly. And it's just like surrounding yourself with people that are much smarter than you. I think that's a humbling experience. You never want to be the smartest person in the room. You always want to be someone that has tons of growth potential based on surrounding yourself with people that are much smarter than you. That's always ideal. And I think that can create a humbling experience. Very humbling experience. All right. Let's see. Also, I think I touched on this a little bit. There's a lot of arrogance that comes with being a software engineer. You should have pride in what you're learning. So I guess I'll share this. My entire life, I never really felt proud of myself. Graduated college. I volunteered at a crisis center. I saved people's lives. I literally did. I had some really messed up calls. And the first time I felt good about myself. I shouldn't say I've never felt good about myself, but the first time I've felt really proud of my career trajectory is when I completed the coding bootcamp at Full Stack Academy. Because my degree, my bachelor's degree, I just shoved into a box, but the Full Stack Academy one, I felt really good when I received that. And then I felt really good when I got a software engineering position. And it's because of how hard it truly was and how much I had to challenge myself to learn everything I needed to know to actually become a professional software engineer that was hirable. I felt proud of that. And for good reason. It's not an easy profession to get into. It's not as accessible as people think. Just because you don't need a degree does not mean it's not extremely difficult, right? And so that's you can have pride in becoming a software engineer and just an engineer in general. And just getting into technology is something you should feel proud about, right? So I think it's okay to have pride. But then software engineers decide to do something kind of toxic with that pride. And they look down on people that don't have that were never in a software engineering position. They look down on people because they make less than them. And they have this mindset I am the developer. This is how we do things. And they think they establish all the rules in the company. And they're not empathetic. They don't care to interact and build relationships with other departments. And it's a very, very toxic mindset that I think comes with pride and ego. Pride and ego are two things that probably apply to everything that we're talking about. But you need to be careful of that. If you think that your opinion is more valuable than anyone else that you're talking to because you're a software engineer, you need an ego check big time. I would say that this problem isn't as prevalent in the tech industry as it used to be. And soft skills are highly valued much more than they used to be. Because companies are realizing how valuable software engineers are that have interpersonal skills. The feedback that you give people, think of even talking with other software engineers, the feedback that you give people, whether it's software engineers or other departments, should never be patronizing, right? Some people, sometimes you'll have people from other departments that come to you and say, I want to build this feature. We really need this feature. Users are asking for it. It's this should be easy, right? And when you hear that, I can empathize with other software engineers that kind of get frustrated. It's okay, before you basically load up all the work that I have to do over the next 2 weeks, let's have a real conversation of how long it's going to take, right? And so you being patronizing, trying to make them feel dumb for even thinking that it'd be a quick feature. I see some software engineers do that. That's a really, really bad habit. Again, interpersonal skills, being empathetic towards other departments, but coming from a place of, okay, I hear it's really important. And, honestly, I'm going to just quickly walk through the implementation in my head. Okay, so, I'm going to have to do this, this, and this. And to be honest, it's probably going to take twice the amount of time, right? And not only that, it's if I do this, I got to dump all the work that I had planned for these 2 weeks. Is this more of a priority than this? It's honestly, you should probably bring it up to the product manager. And sometimes it's redirecting that, because usually you have a system to prevent tons of people coming directly to software engineers, and it should go to the product manager. But sometimes it's even that, but even just talking through and explaining, this is probably going to take longer than you think. And then they can approach the product manager with that and then say, okay, I actually, Don just told me that, he's going to have to dump this feature. I actually think this feature is more important. I think he should dump it. And like, I understand it's going to take 4 weeks. Let's go ahead and implement it. And, the product manager is listening to all these different needs from different departments. And ultimately, like, they're probably going to prioritize that. That they're usually that full stop before it even reaches an engineer to decide if the engineer is going to be working on it. But having that conversation initially, you got to be careful of like really trying to be. Most software engineers aren't trying to be patronizing, but you have to be careful about being patronizing. And again, this comes from like sometimes software engineers think too much of themselves. And you have to understand they don't really know all this implementation stuff. They assume it's going to be easy, and you just have to, in a calm, grounded manner, explain why it's going to take like twice or 3 times the amount of time that they think it's going to take. And sometimes that even means if you can have that conversation without being patronizing and explain, it's going to take longer and this is why. But, if we actually did cut this requirement out of your feature, we could dump it down to 2 weeks. How important is this requirement? And so that's a really, really constructive and productive conversation to have with that individual. Be careful about how you come across. Again, I think the tech industry is moving in the right direction to really value these interpersonal skills, but I still have seen software engineers act like that and treat others like that. Again, all these things that I'm pointing out, these negative things, these are all things that are like going to prevent you from getting promoted, that gets people fired. You become part of the layoffs, right? A lot of these things, a lot of companies, I think, will just give a generic message, sorry, financial situation, we just got to lay people off. But I'm telling you, a lot of these layoffs, there's more to it, right? There's a lot of like lack of interpersonal skills or lack of integrity, lack of this, lack of that, that kind of gets you considered to be part of that layoff package. The layoffs they don't just like randomly select people. Yep, these 90 people, they're getting laid off. We just put them in a hat, got drunk one day and started picking them out of the hat. Sorry, folks. Right? It doesn't happen like that. And I'm telling you, interpersonal skills are huge, and you being valuable to people that are in control of you even being hired there or being promoted there. They're huge. They are so huge, and people underestimate how valuable these are. Most of the times people don't get promoted. Like, you don't really get promoted to a senior engineer in a lot of companies unless you have these interpersonal skills and you're willing to mentor junior developers, right? You can't just be this excellent specialized code monkey. Like, in a few companies that might work, but you are a human being that needs to like really have good interactions with a lot of the people at the company. So that's communication. What do you guys think of that? Any questions? I might actually get some more water. There's so much to talk about here. Damn, it's already like an hour and 10 minutes. There's a lot of depth to this. I actually, I came up with this outline. I'm like, I'm missing out on so much stuff. I'm leaving stuff out. Man, I hope this is going to be valuable, but it's like an hour and 10 minutes into it. And I guess we're actually coming to the end, so we're making good time. The stream is full of knowledge gems, by the way. That's awesome. I'm glad it's helpful. Would you say that empathy and critical thinking are the dynamic duo to have a dev? Empathy and self-discipline and time management. Because you can honestly get lost into a thought pattern of like really think about all these business problems and solutions and not really get anything done either. So I think proper planning and time management, especially when it comes to implementation, is also really important. You can be very ineffective at your position if you don't plan things out properly and you don't pay attention to your time. And you'd be surprised when you look at your day-to-day. Some companies will have employees do this. Some people will think it's like, I don't know, like micromanaging. It should never be to the point where like a company is just, I hate these stupid extensions on VS Code. How long did this person code in VS Code? And it's going to be recorded in company times and we want to track productivity. That's creepy as fuck to me. I don't want to be at a company that does that crap, but a company that's willing to say, hey, actually, honestly, you're not getting some stuff done, or you're not getting as much done as we want you to get done. I want to give you a tool to actually analyze your day-to-day. I think you can become more productive, and I want to help you do that, right? That's a very different conversation than like tracking and micromanaging. That's almost an empathetic conversation of your manager trying to, they want you to get up to speed and they want you to be a valuable part of the team. But it's sometimes like a manager will even lay out like, hey, let's track what you're doing hour to hour. Honestly, I really think this is going to be helpful. And you would be surprised, even when I analyzed a day-to-day of aspiring developers that say, oh my God, I'm doing everything possible, I cannot get a job. There is not a single developer I have ever mentored that was doing everything that they claimed to be doing. And when we looked at it, we broke it down 15 minutes by 15 minutes by 15 minutes by 15 minutes, which is annoying to even think about. But when you break that down, you realize how unproductive you actually are. You realize how poor of time management skills you actually have. There isn't a single person that can't improve that, right? Let's dive into time management. That's a really good question of like empathy and critical thinking. I would have to think about that. Empathy, I think, will get you a long way. I would say empathy and your interpersonal skills are probably key. But yeah, critical thinking and time management would probably come after that. That's my personal opinion with it. Given that you're at a certain technical proficiency when you're hired. All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to grab some more water because we have some more things to talk about. Whew. All right. Spitting straight fire. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate that. Cool. Time management. So I guess that's the first portion of time management to consider. A lot of people aren't as productive as they think they are, including me. The past 2 years, I am telling you, I didn't realize how bad I was at this. But quitting my job, not having a manager to tell me if I'm doing a good job or not, or moving in the right direction or not, or, moving at a right speed or not, having to figure that out on my own has been one of the hardest challenges I've faced as an entrepreneur. Man, my time management really, really sucked when I started. And I would say now it's only starting to get to a point where I feel pretty good about it. And I still have a long ways to go. I have a lot to work on with that. Don't estimate the power of just like even planning out your day. Like you start the day, you just write it out. This is what I'm aiming to complete. Did I complete it? Why not? Maybe the expectations are too high that I'm setting for myself. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm taking, I don't know. I go to the bathroom and then I'm chatting with people at work over and over and over. Like go to the bathroom, I don't know, 8 times a day or something like that. And yeah, like that's a lot of conversations to have if you're constantly going to someone's desk and just chatting about something. Like, does that need to happen? So like you have to find this balance of like not micromanaging yourself, but understanding that most employees probably aren't as productive as they can be. And you should care about that. I think a lot of people have this mindset of like, well, I'm going to do the minimum possible to get by at work and get paid and go home. When you develop that mindset, you have to realize your mindset that you develop anywhere with anything will carry over into other parts of your life. Whatever job you're doing, you should really strive to do that job as well as you can. And it's not for the company. Fuck the company. Do it for yourself. It's about building up good habits, because like, let's say you do get laid off. Let's say you do get fired, whatever. You can take those really good habits, those productive habits, because being productive and having good time management skills is huge in you being successful in your career. You getting fired and you just saying, okay, you know what? That's fine. I did my best. I truly did. You feel confident about that. You can take that into your next position, or you don't have to get fired. Maybe you just quit, right? But you can take that into your next position and stand a much higher chance of making more money and being more valuable to the company, getting more promotions, getting higher pay with your promotions. And you could even take that. I know a lot of people want to start their own companies. That's a really important skill to have if you do decide to dive into freelancing, if you decide to build out your own product and put a pricing model around it, or make money as a developer on the side. Like, those habits, do it for yourself. Like I said, fuck the company. I'm not saying do it for the company, but do it for yourself, so you really build up those strong habits that'll carry over into that self-discipline. The time management, the productivity will carry over into you being consistent with your workouts, you being consistent with your diet, you being consistent with a hobby that you want to build up. Maybe you for me, I want to go scuba diving, right? I guess I live by Lake Michigan. I don't know if I'm going to go scuba diving in Lake Michigan, to be honest, but I still have this dream of kind of moving to Florida and learning how to scuba dive and surf, and, those are skills that I have to build up. Or like, even with scuba diving, you have to put tons of hours into getting your certification, stuff like that. And it's easy just to say, like, one day, I don't really want to do it today. I'm going to cancel. I'm going to reschedule, right? Have you ever done that? Canceled, rescheduled because you didn't feel like it? When you can follow through with that thing that you really want to cancel on, man, that just builds an even stronger habit to tackle any negative days or rough days, to continue building all those rough days. Especially you come into work, you are tired, you're sluggish, you don't want to be there. If you can try to be as productive as you were the previous day, do your best about it. Don't give yourself an excuse to slack off, I'm hungover, I didn't get much sleep. If you don't give yourself that excuse and you push yourself, that, I'm telling you, when I talk to very, very successful people, that is a trait that they have, even during the crappy days, even during the days that they just don't want to do it, or they don't want to self-analyze, they don't even want to work on these interpersonal skills, they don't really want to try to be productive. But when they do all that anyways, it becomes so much easier to build those skills up on the good days. It's such a strong habit that I see as a very common trait among many successful people. Don't give yourself an excuse for that. I know I kind of went off on a tangent. We started off with time management, but I think that's really important. I guess one final aspect is you're going to be giving estimates with your work. You want to try to give accurate estimates. I always say estimate just a little bit high. I used to estimate low because I wanted to impress the product manager, and I used to think the product manager was my manager, and which they're often not. But over time, you're going to implement a lot of features and you will get better at giving time estimates. But that's something you're going to have to really try to focus on. And, sometimes it can be hard to give time estimates until you start figuring out how long it took you to implement some of those features and just writing it down and paying attention to that. Time estimates as a software engineer is something you're going to be giving to many, many people. Well, usually a product manager, but it's something you want to get better at. And it's a tough thing to solidify. And sometimes it can take years of experience, but yeah. All right. That's it. So I have two other things I want to mention. Two other things. That's pretty much all my talking points. And then I want to call myself out. So before I call myself out, who gets promoted? People that focus on their interpersonal skills. People that focus on the stuff that I talk about, that I've just talked about. You focus on everything that I'm mentioning right now. I am telling you, you are going to be a rare gem. You are going to be extremely valuable. And usually a lot of these skills, don't overwhelm yourself with all this. I'm just saying all the things that you can focus on, right? And you start with interacting with people. Go into developer communities. Go participate in a hackathon or join a meetup or interact with other developers to practice it. Don't expect yourself to be great with the interactions. Literally, a key thing. Why does my nose itch? A key thing is you are going to suck. Like if you are sitting at home, we've just been through a pandemic and, you're the last 2 years, you're just sitting at home and you're just being antisocial and just like trying to work on stuff, code, apply to jobs. I know a lot of people have been doing that. Your skills are something you need to practice. Your interpersonal skills, your communication skills, you have to practice them to keep up with them and to get better at them. And they can atrophy. And a lot of people's interpersonal skills have atrophied, and that's okay, right? Understandably, given what we went through. But this is something you want to work on as early as possible. Don't wait until you join a company to try to work on these skills, because usually a company will try to weed people out that haven't really prioritized these skills, that haven't worked on these skills. And when you start with these interactions, understand you're going to be awkward. You're going to be really awkward. Some people, you might even have someone that just like walks away. It's like, okay, nice to meet you. And it's clear it's like that interaction wasn't going really well for them, and they just want to move on. That's okay. That's going to happen. That's expected. That's not a sign that you aren't getting better at it. That is a sign that you are getting better at it, right? And a lot of people take that personally. And you again, going back to like, how are you going to ground yourself when you experience these negative interactions as you build your interpersonal skills by forcing yourself out of your comfort zone? How are you going to be able to deal with the emotion that's tied to that? You ground yourself. You find that grounding. Right? Someone mentioned jujitsu. That's how they find that grounding. You have to find your grounding. And most people know their grounding. They just don't do it as often as they should. Those are the people that are going to get hired. Those are the people that are going to get promoted. And you'll even find like the way you interact with people, it's like you find more confidence. You're able to push back, but you're also able to not push back too far and like, become abrasive. And like a lot of this stuff, it's going to help you not only like get promoted and even get hired, but also have confidence in the value that you can provide and negotiate your salary higher. Have confidence in the job search, and that'll show through in your interactions, that confidence. I'm telling you, when you build up your interpersonal skills, that there's so much confidence that's built with that in the way you interact with people. That's why anyone that I interact, I mean, I've been doing this podcast for a while now. Like I don't care who I talk to. I usually have confidence in whoever I'm talking to. I've gotten nervous before. I have, but like those times have really minimized. The more I do it, the better I get with it. Now, with that said, that's you right now. So here, I want to call myself out. So this is how I perceive myself on YouTube. I can be a dick. I can be abrasive. I can be very, very challenging, and some might I should go through a list of things that I've been called as a YouTuber. But so when I create my content, I always come from a place of empathy. Everything that I do, everything that I say is from a place of empathy, but sometimes I'm thinking about people that you aren't. And when I'm like challenging these coding boot camps and like, even that mentality of like, made some enemies at coding staff at coding boot camps, like CEO wants to talk to me. Fuck it, let's talk, right? And I kind of have that like cocky and arrogant mentality. And I do that for a reason, because my empathy is for the student. It's for the student who's struggling to pay bills, to just like work through a career that's actually going to treat them well, that's actually going to give them the life that they want, right? So my empathy is towards that student. And so when I challenge all these like coding boot camps, you always see like, I've talked a little bit about Joshua Fluke, but honestly, like I looked up to him for so many years. He's the reason I quit my job, right? I praise him so much. Like I deserve to be able to talk about all the negative crap, in my opinion. So, but I even barely talk about him, but all my challenging, me being very candid with a lot of the feedback that I give, it's towards organizations, and it's challenging. It's very challenging. I'm very challenging with advice that I think is going to hurt engineers. So that's why I don't really call out specific content creators. So I'm not really interested in becoming a drama channel, but like I talk about like content creators are giving this shitty ass advice. And it's because like I just got done with a mentorship session of like, this person took the feedback of this is like best coding boot camp to go to. And, she's surrounded by like just 4 walls, right? Tiny ass apartment, can't even pay her bills. She's like going to get evicted soon. I think about those situations, and that fuels me to be so challenging to these organizations. And I'm very candid with what I do. But the way I even present myself in my content, I want to be very clear. It's not how you should interact at work. A lot of, how do I want to say this? I guess a lot of what I do, and I guess a lot of what I do in the challenging nature of myself, it's very different in the way that I would interact with people at a company. And when you go to a company, you have to understand, like, there is kind of a corporate culture feel. You have to kind of play along to get along, and you have to learn how to work the system a bit. And there, it does have some like fakeness to it. And I think that's one of the amazing things about YouTube specific. I'm losing my voice at this point. Been going for a long time, but that's one of the amazing things about YouTube, is because I can be so blunt and so candid, and it catches people's attention. And that's another thing, like with YouTube, is a lot of content creators realize and they learn it's like the more candid, almost like abrasive in a sense, that they can be, and when they call things out that they see and stuff like that, people love that. It feeds it into the algorithm, but also people pay attention. You know, when sometimes when I'll purposely like just toss out a cuss word, like, oh, it wakes people up. I'm actually pretty strategic about the way I do come across in my content, but I want to be very clear, like the way even that I'm so challenging and I interact with, like, when I hear bullshit and I call out bullshit, I'm not doing this at the company. That's not how I interact with people. So I also want you to be very careful in trying to like listen to what I just said with all these interpersonal skills, but also don't try to replicate what I'm doing on YouTube. It's a very different feel. And I would even argue, if some employers look at some of my content and they think that's how I'm going to interact at the company, I'm not going to get hired. I would argue some of my content will prevent me from ever being considered at a few companies. And that's okay. I'm okay with that, because I've decided like what I'm doing is very effective, and I'm completing kind of just like what I set out to do, and I'm helping tons of software engineers, even if I have to come off as abrasive, candid, etc. when I challenge all these, you know, large companies that are making a lot of money. I have less empathy for them than I do the students. So I want you to recognize that. Don't try to replicate like how I potentially interact when I do these live streams and stuff. I just go off. I let myself be emotional, right? And sometimes I'll just let myself go off on a tangent, but like, you have to realize a lot of people, you're not the only person that has these thoughts and these frustrations and like taking feedback poorly. Like, a lot of people don't have great interpersonal skills, and we're all just trying to do our best to, I guess, build those skills up as much as we can, so we can kind of just get by and, you know, get promoted, be successful in life, build strong relationships, build good relationships. But a lot of people, like, internally, like, we have a lot of self-defeating thoughts. We have a lot of thoughts, things we want to say to other people when they interact with us. But a lot of that, you have to realize, being yourself isn't about saying everything that comes to the top of your mind like I do as a YouTuber, right? A lot of people, they ground themselves and they're able to let those thoughts kind of flow through their mind, and then they flow out, right? That's a very grounded place to be in. When you have this thought, you realize it's not appropriate. It's like, it's not going to be effective in achieving what you want to achieve, and you let that thought float out. The only way you can do that is through practice and through grounding yourself and coming into the office, like really just like taking care of your life, your health, having a really healthy lifestyle, will often having like a strong hobby that you keep up with, and like building strong relationships that'll support you in life. Like, a lot of that will ground you. So yeah, so it makes it easier. But I don't want people to feel like they're antisocial or can't get along with people just because they have these like, you know, really candid, abrasive thoughts. A lot of people have them. They just learn how to be strategic. They learn how to pick their battles. It's just a strategy in life. It's not even just a workplace or corporate culture. That's a strategy you should have in life, at like just making sure what you're saying is actually effective and achieving what you are trying to achieve. Sometimes it's just building a strong relationship through empathy. And, you know, even through an empathetic conversation, you might think like, man, like, you're kind of just being a victim. Like, I've thought that before. Like, you're kind of just being a victim. Like, it doesn't even sound like you put any effort into solving your situation. I heard you just complain to like 5 other people 3 months ago. You've been doing this like every month. Like, I've had that thought pattern, but am I going to just outright tell them at the workplace, like, you're just being a victim, you got to get over it? No, right? I'm not going to do that. I'm a very strategic in what I think. So I also did want to distinguish. It's like a lot of my presence on YouTube is going to be different than how I interact at the workplace and just in life in general. So don't necessarily replicate how I interact on YouTube. But I'm telling you, interpersonal skills are, they're tough. A lot of people struggle with them. That's it. That's all I had. What do you guys think of it? You agree? You disagree with anything? What's your idol's name? I don't think I have an idol. Maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. I don't think I idolize anyone anymore. I just got here. I'll be sure to watch this afterwards. Hope it helps. Oh, man. I feel like I'm losing my voice, though. Sometimes I think I talk a lot and very fast on a stream. I feel like I was just going 90 miles per hour and just... but there's so much to talk about with this topic, you know? Cool. Well, if no one has anything to say in chat, that's it. I hope this helps. My screen just went blank. And, I don't know, just don't be so hard on yourself. Understand it's a process. It's going to take a while to build up these skills. But if you prioritize these skills, man, I'm telling you, you're going to be so successful in life. You really are. So much good info. Definitely going to rewatch and take notes. Hope it helps. And if anyone's watching this past broadcast, let me know what you thought. And feel free to agree, disagree in the comments below. But yeah, if you just watch it and you want to ask questions on Friday, we're going to be doing a live stream, a live Q&A, 1:30 Central Time on Friday. Do it every week. It's kind of a little bit more of an open Q&A. We can go back and forth. The YouTuber. Oh yeah, I set it up. I keep forgetting I set up my stream deck. I always forget that. I don't know why. But I didn't set it up. That's why I click it. Okay. I'm not insane. Anyways, thanks again, everyone that does support me on Patreon, YouTube, by becoming a YouTube member or Patreon. I think they call them like patrons or something like that. Definitely hope this helps. And if you want me to do, like, Wednesdays are specific topic days. If you want me to do a specific topic, just leave it in a comment or even just like DM me on Discord, anything like that. Happy to help however I can. Don't BRB screen too. I'm glad you liked it. You are welcome. I wonder if there might be a huge delay. I don't know. I'll have to look at the delay. But anyways, yeah, thanks for being here. Hope this helps. I will be live 1:30 Central Time Friday. Ask me anything then. And that's it. Good luck on your projects, everyone. Take care.